This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
The Future of Cities is proudly brought to you by Diesel Consulting Group, empowering institutions that enable Africa's development.
Power Talk with Lerato Mbele.
And enabling Africa's development is ultimately what we're striving for. Remember those words earlier on. Quincy Jones says, you know what? You got to strive for excellence because that's what Africa needs. And so let's remember that in our conversation now. We're talking about the making of a smart city, and we've been doing this over the last three occasions. It's a bi-weekly focus on future cities in Africa, the kind of city you should dream of and you should want to live in, a place where services like refuse is collected on time, sewage is diverted, waste is cleaned, rates and taxes are affordable and they're fair. Public transportation works really well. The lights are on. That's a smart city, digitally underpinned by technology. Now, Ndiso Consulting works extensively with municipalities in this country, and they've observed a few best practices that South African cities can employ. And so over the next few weeks, they will keep on telling us what are some of the interventions that can be made. There's a caller who called for solutions. Here we're discussing some of those solutions. And I am now joined by Miyelani Holeni, who is the Ndiso Group Chief Advisor at Ndiso Consulting, to talk us through this important issue of municipal funding and financing of infrastructure. Miyelani, good morning.
Good morning, Lerato, and good morning to the listeners. It's lovely to be talking this morning.
Absolutely. Okay, school us. We're being schooled this morning, so school us. So when we're talking about funding for infrastructure, because we recognize that infrastructure is a key component of making a city work better and delivering services. But who's going to pay for it?
So I think it's apt that we would let's go back to some of the mechanisms that are available for local government with regards to funding. So I want to make a distinction between financing as well as funding.
Okay.
So financing are all the instruments that are possibly available, your loans, your term loans, your project finance, and all of those things that are available as financing instruments for whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it's local government. But when we go specifically into the funding of the municipality, we are looking at the internal allocations that are being made, whether from a national treasury level, provincial government, as well as own funding sources of funding within the municipality. So I think it's important that from a national level, we understand that there's a Division of Revenue Act, which is what the Minister of Finance will present once annually when there's a budget speech, and will decide where do the allocations go. And this is how the allocations then start flowing from that division of revenue, coming mainly from the fiscus and other sources which government at least has income from, whether it's taxes, whether it's monies coming from mining, the levies that are coming from mining and all of that. But it flows eventually to the point where we then say we have funding for local government.
Okay, so let me get it clear in my head. So when we talk financing, it's the investment case. We need a power station, the banks will come in, investors will come in, PPPs, that's financing. Funding is when the Treasury says this year we're giving municipality X amount, make it work.
Absolutely. So it is that finite amount of money that is now available, which must be, for lack of a better word, be cut up in such a way that everyone walks away with something. And this is where I think the crux of the matter today comes in, that in as much as there are best efforts from all the technocrats, and we have excellent technocrats, dare I say, whether at national, at provincial, at municipal level, and across the board with the general financiers that are involved with local government space. But you get to a point where you're saying, but I am not getting what I was hoping for. I did not receive what would move my municipality forward. Then the question comes up, how then do we work with it? So let's understand then, you have your operational side of your budget, You also have the capital side of your budget. So it's loosely operational. People will call it OPEX, and capital side would call it CAPEX. And OPEX is about the everyday things that happen within a municipality. We must pay for the chlorine that's going to cleanse the water for the swimming pools. We must pay for the salaries. We must pay for the fuel. We must pay. So those are the things that would keep a municipality running on a daily basis. And what that comes from is, from a national point of view, comes in the equitable share, which is then a formula which hotly contested, or at least has people that are saying it's not good for us, it's good for others. So the equitable share comes from the fiscus, and the cities, which are the large municipalities, will tend to receive more from the equitable share, because they have larger responsibilities, larger populations, and predisposition to funding more indigent. And then comes in the issues of free basic services, and then come in under other aspects that they also fund, which I think I'll park for a little bit, which are more unfunded mandates. Then the funding flows in that way into a municipality. But the municipality must then combine that income with, or at least the funding, with their own funding, which comes from internal sources, which is revenue. Now, revenue will come later in our discussion. So from an OPEX funding point of view, the municipality, we must keep it running. We must pay salaries. We must pay for ESCOM. We must pay rent, all the overheads that we are sitting with, all the expenses that we are sitting with, to the point that we know that the obligations are met on a monthly basis. Now, that is funding which at times presents problems, because you then find that the OPEX, or the equitable share, or the total funding that the municipality has, sometimes would run out for good reason, for bad reason, as well as now flowing over to the capital side, which is mainly grants that are flowing as well from the national side. So those are the two areas that we are going to be delving deeper into.
I feel like I've just been sitting in Ecos 101 and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to fail the course. Okay, so what we are told, and in fact even you told us this a few weeks ago, is that in terms of the allocations from the Treasury, local governments in South Africa receive a very small proportion of the money that's allocated, something to the tune of 8 to 12%. So there's not a lot of money that's coming through from the Treasury, but this is the money they have to make work. They have to pay their salaries, keep the lights on, make sure, as you say, that they have chlorine to clean the swimming pools in their district. Isn't that all gobbled up? That little bit of money, that finite amount, isn't that gobbled up before they can start thinking about the CAPEX, which is what can we use to start investing in such a way that our infrastructure improves?
So I think exactly the point, Lerato. The funding is then set and fixed in a particular way, which would then, and obviously you don't want to have too much backwards and forwards. In other words, changing. You want to fix your budget and say, this is my budget. I am going to live within my means, which is important for municipalities. A budget must be fully funded. It can never, you can never pass a budget, or in fact, legislation does not allow municipalities to pass a budget which is not fully funded. It must be funded to the last rand. So as soon as that money obviously arrives, there are many responsibilities that are there. Sometimes you find that, it's one of those years where there has to be negotiations around wages, where unions as well or employees are also up in arms and saying, we have not received our increases. So you'll find that if you start combing through the OPEX budget, a large proportion of that goes into paying wages or staff or salaries that are sitting there. So you don't have a lot of room to move within there. So yes, it is gobbled. But I think here's a point where we would like to at least push for is, within the spending of a municipality, you can broadly, and this is our own classification from a DSO consulting point of view, one, you can fund things which are obligations, and obligations are things that are you have to spend money on. You have to pay for free basic services, or at least subsidize the free basic services. There's also the social services that you have to take care of. There's also the firefighting, and so on and so forth. The cemeteries, those things don't go away. They stay within the budget annually, and you must provide for the maintenance of that. But broadly, there's also maintenance, which is O&M, operations and maintenance. You've built a road, you don't want to leave it until 10 years later where you have to now pay a lot more money to renew that road. You also...
Yes, listening.
You also want to make sure that you then look at, the other side of things where you are procuring things and you're spending things and so on. But there's also wastage in the system. So the wastage is one area that we need to be looking at. But the big thing that we should be thinking about within local government is how do we spend money for growth?
Okay.
How do we spend whatever the rand that we have and be able to apportion X number of cents in a rand to start funding growth? And when you start funding growth, is you already are thinking of your master plan. So I need to have a master plan that says in 10 years, in 15 years, in 30 years, this is what I'm going to look like. The economic development or local economic development department has told me that this is where the economy and the sectors are going to grow. This is where the city planners have now planned to say the city is going to the east. Whatever we do, if we start spending 5 cents in a rand towards making sure there are roads, wastewater treatment, substations, reservoirs, water, and all of that, it's a foregone conclusion that the city is moving in that direction. But when we spend for growth, we start unlocking the funding that's going to come in property rates, in electricity, in water, and all the other revenue streams that are available to the municipality. That is where I think we should be going with funding.
You've moved 10 steps ahead for me, and we can come to talk about growth in a second. I still want to look at what you refer to as the capital allocation, the grants, the rates and taxes, what people pay, because the ordinary South African looks around and says, I pay my rates and taxes, but still the potholes are outside. I pay my rates and taxes, and still City Power can't guarantee me electricity in a month. And so the issue is how much of what user pay, those concessions of what the user is paying, gets allocated to the servicing of the deliverables, or again, gets allocated to the operations to make the municipality run functionally.
Yeah. So ideally, there's at least it's about 7.5% of whatever the value of the asset in that region that must be spent annually on maintenance. So that is kind of the minimum that should be spent. So a budget should then be able to say, forget everything else that we have, but we have an asset which is a hall. We need to ensure that hall is at least the ceiling is maintained, the lights, the plumbing, and so on and so forth, to keep up that asset so that you can elongate its lifespan, and you don't have to come back and start now spending capex on it. So you then use your opex, which is your everyday money, to be able to upkeep the building, to make sure that it's painted, it's clean, the windows are not broken, the door handles are working, and all of those things. So that is how much should be spent. And when we talk about the maintenance side of things, before we jump onto the capex, and the question is that then how much should you be spending on capex? I think that's after dealing with the everyday issues. Our view is that if you take a budget, for instance, you can take budgets, and we sample budgets of City of Tshwane, which sits at about 44 billion, Cape Town at 75 billion, which is the total budget. You'll then start seeing that there are differing levels of allocations for capital for capex, and those differing levels determine how much you are then allocating, even to fix things like potholes, even to resurface roads, even to at least renew the infrastructure or to upgrade it. And this is just around the upgrades. You have not even spoken about, there's some new infrastructure that will be built, but there's a lot of resurfacing, a lot of upgrades, so that's dealing with all of that. You should be spending as well in the region of not less than 10% of your total budget. But this is where now the catch comes in, because with the unavailability or the scarcity of those of the funding, you find a lot of municipalities and even cities are spending way less than that sort of mark.
And it shows. And it shows when you look at some of the municipalities in South Africa, so much of the infrastructure in disrepair. Can we go back to a little bit of the financing, or are we going to call it funding? And my question really is, are municipalities able to borrow money from the capital markets? So when they find that this amount that's been allocated is not enough for their ambitions, can they independently go and fundraise?
They can, and which is another instrument that at least broadens the pool of funding. So when you count your own revenue, which is what you generate from the users paying, you are then able to take your balance sheet and go and knock on the door of starting with your banker and saying, my banker, this is what I'm looking for. I would like to spend money to go and build 10 reservoirs because I have growth which is coming over the next 5 to 10 years, but I'm spending this money so that I have sufficient infrastructure. So then you can take your balance sheet and go and borrow. But there are limitations from where you're sitting as a local to where you're sitting as a district municipality or to where you're sitting as a metro. Now, starting with locals, you can go and talk to your bank and you can then go over there, extend the line and go to talk to the development finance institutions like your Development Bank of Southern Africa and other ones which are maybe more international in nature, your French development agencies and Germans, USAID and so on. So you have at least an ensemble of sources that can be tapped into, but those must be backed by, one, your balance sheet, repayability for some of them, and you may even be fortunate or lucky and receive grants within the same funding where X amount of money goes into project preparation, it goes into project taking into feasibility, and then from there the rest of the funding comes in, which helps a lot because often projects don't see the light of day because they are not properly prepared. So then you're finding that the market says we're sitting with a lot of money, and municipalities are sitting with projects that are not ready, and then there's a funding mismatch, which is something that at least stops the flow of money. So then the next level from districts behave very similar to the locals, but metros are the ones that are more fortunate because they can also go and issue bonds, which is now to go and tap into the capital debt markets, which is a much more vibrant source of funding. And why they can do that? Because they are rated by ratings agencies, your Moody's, your Fitch, and so on. But districts and locals don't have those available. And think about a local, which is a large town. Examples, Mbombela. Examples, Polokwane. Examples, Rustenburg. And you can think of those type of large towns that are sitting and are waiting for growth, and they have the desire, but are not able to go beyond the traditional funding or financing mechanisms to be able to increase their funding.
Wow. Sure, this is so illuminating. Okay, so let's go back to your own question the other day. Let's just go back to your own question. How do you spend for growth, which you raised at the start of the conversation, is what I wanted to say. And the ambitious plans that municipalities and metros can be putting on the table to say, this is what we need, this is what we envisage, and this is how it links up to the broader national project, because we're told that a lot of these metros actually have integrated development plans which kind of link up with the development trajectory and proposals of the country as a whole.
Now, I think, and that's at least where everyone should be thinking about now. There's an emergence of a whole lot of funds within the total funding universe, such as the Green Fund, which would fund projects that are mainly to do with solar, renewables, and so on. There's also climate funds, which are quite similar. There's also infrastructure funds that are developing, and so on. So what we are putting forward is that we need a growth fund. We need a growth fund within a municipality, and that growth fund is a very deliberate fund which is created from the available sources of funding, which can then be complemented by raising funds or getting financing from other institutions. And that growth fund, the task of that growth fund is to be able to fund future growth. Future growth is a road that links the old town to a new area which is coming up, which has been established or is about to be established, and is going through the necessary town planning processes, so that once the road comes in, the bulk infrastructure comes in, electricity, water, the filling station comes up, the housing begins, whether it's estate, whether it's townhouses, whether it's low-cost housing or social housing, and all of those aspects. So that is now saying Growth Fund must fund what the master plan is all about. Master planning, in 30 years, we're going to look like this. But whilst that is happening, is the municipality is also making or growing their share or their pie or the cake of their own revenue, because then they have now a greater source of revenue. And that's how municipalities' revenue grows. There's no magic that says the economy should do this or there's inflation there. Yes, those forces will be there, your PPIs will be there. But the fact is that if you don't grow by the number of stands or residents or developments that are there, then it means that there's regression, because people then are easily going to migrate into other areas which are more lucrative. And once municipalities are spending on growth, you start attracting industry, you start attracting investors, you start attracting new dwellers within there, and all of a sudden it becomes more convenient to dwell in this area and be working in another area because perhaps you provide a much more affordable rate. So spending for growth is something which must be demarcated and driven in a very deliberate way that says 5 cents of our rand we're going to plow into future projects. It's not about filling potholes. We will fill the potholes, by the way. We will make sure the street lights are burning at night. We will make sure that all of those other things that we need to do happen, but we are now being deliberate because we are funding our master plan to take us forward.
We're reimagining that future. Miyelani, there's a question coming through from Lesetja and Garankuwa. Hello.
Hi, Lerato. Hi, Miyelani. How are you?
Fine,
Good.
Go ahead, Ndade.
All good. Okay, so I have 3 questions. I'll try to be brief because I see we're already running out of time. The first question is a question of maladministration. Because now for every budget that has been allocated, there needs to be a return on investment that is shown for that. But we are currently having a history of maladministration within our municipalities. Who needs to hold those people accountable? Secondly is how is the budget allocated? I do understand that your local governments get about 8 to 12%, but where I come from, in a business institution, you are given a budget, and if you do have some money left from your budget the following financial year, then that difference will be taken away because it will show as you do not need that. But if you do go over your budget, then that's when you are able to negotiate to say, I need more money.
Lisich, I'm going to interrupt you there. Can we just get Miyelani to answer these 2 questions before the news? So accountability, especially when there's been maladministration, and budgets that can't roll over.
So I think the issue of accountability, we need to keep now a different kind of capability, or develop a different kind of capability to deal with those aspects of maladministration. And wastage is something which can happen accidentally. It can happen as well intentionally. So if we at least have a capability within the municipality that deals and watches expenditure, such that from the time that we have a procurement plan to the time that the companies are employed, is the value for money, firstly. And that's where the crux of the matter is, because whatever happens after that is, are you spending money in the areas where you should be spending, and are you receiving value for money with the services that you are buying, or you are overpaying? Because that is where some of the aspects can come in, which may then end up being, whether it's maladministration, where you run out of money because you have overpaid on a particular service or particular services, or you have underpaid and you're not getting the right kind of services. So we need to create that capability within the municipality, which sits whether in the office of the CFO or in the office of the municipal manager or city manager, because those are areas where we need to keep now overall a watch of where the spending goes, and constantly be redirecting whatever we may call wastage and squeeze it out of the system to be able to invest more in the growth.
We thank you so much for your time, Miyelani Holeni, who is the Group Chief Advisor at Ndiso Consulting, talking to us about getting our municipalities to work better, to use their money better and to provide services that people need. Because Zolani says, it's quite sad, and it's a real situation, is that budgets of many municipalities or metros are unfunded, creating false hopes for citizens who expect services that must be delivered and spend far less on repairs and maintenance. And today we've gotten an understanding of how that money flows once it's been allocated by the Treasury. It is part of our series on future cities, smart cities, functional cities, brought to you by Ndiso Consulting. Time for the news.
The Future of Cities was proudly brought to you by Ndiso Consulting Group, empowering institutions that enable Africa's development.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.